Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with you, along with our historian, storyteller, and raconteur, Bill Barlee. We're heading to the north-central part of British Columbia, and I always my concept of gold and stuff ends at Barkerville, but a lot of things happened around what we call Prince George today.
Mike, we're talking about, I think, what I consider a great story of the original Prince George. Now, we're talking about three towns. We're talking about Fort George, we're talking about South Fort George, we're talking about Prince George. We're talking about three companies. We're talking about the British Columbia Express, which had stern wheelers and stagecoaches and Winton cars. We're talking about the Grand Trunk Pacific, and we're talking about the Hudson's Bay Company, the Honorable Company. And we're talking about two rivers. We're talking about the Nechako, and we're talking about probably the greatest river outside of the Columbia in British Columbia, the Fraser River.
So in this context, with these rivers and these companies and this stuff, we will assess the three Georges of the central interior British Columbia. We'll do that right after this break. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts with Bill Barlee, and today we're talking about the three Georges of the central interior. So there's Fort George, South Fort George, and eventually Prince George.
In that order, Mike.
In that order.
Sure.
Okay. Now I'm so used to the 1860s and 1890s we're talking about. We're talking 1900s here.
This is a town that came out of the 1860s, 1890s, right into the 1900s, virtually overnight, Mike.
Yeah.
So, same old story in the central interior. In the 1890s, the early part of the century, up to about 1900, just after 1900, this is the domain of the Honorable Company, the Hudson's Bay Company.
I've got their flag here. Now, this flag...
That's an original. It's not one made up by the Hudson's Bay Company, in the last year or so.
Now, you know this just by the stitching and the material.
And also who I got it from.
Yeah? Can you tell that story?
I cannot tell that story.
Well, look at that, though. This flew... Now, it may not have flown over Fort George, this particular flag, but it certainly flew over the Hudson's Bay Company.
It flew over Hudson's Bay Company post, in fact.
Is that right?
You bet it did.
And, of course, they were there because fur trading was their line of work.
Sure. They owned most of Canada at one time.
Yeah.
So the Hudson's Bay Company was there, and of course, in the immediate vicinity were the Indians of the district. They were mostly trappers. Yeah. Almost all of them are trappers. There were some miners, so that's basically it. So we had some Indians, we had some guys like Stony Creek Charlie, who was...
Now this is his picture, Stony Creek Charlie, and he looks so serene and happy. How old is he here?
About 100 years old. Maybe just over 100 years old.
He's heading out on his pack line?
He's heading out on his pack line, smoking his pipe. He's all ready to go. He lives well past 100, going into Stony Creek. So that's called a Stony Creek Charlie.
And he's carrying an old percussion cap rifle. Even though it's wrapped up, the hammer's still visible. Do you think he had it all primed and ready to go, even though it was like...
Sure, he wasn't going to pass up some meat on the way.
Right, so he's there, the Hudson's Bay Company's there, just a few miners, because they're heading, I guess, north or south from there.
And this is the photograph, the other photograph we're looking at is the Hudson's Bay Company Fort, and this is Fort George.
Okay.
This is the first key to the whole puzzle. Now, the second key comes in 1903. New government in Canada, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. He announces, one of his first announcements, 1903, that he is going to extend the Grand Trunk Pacific to the Pacific coast. And he says where it's going to be extended, and it happens to hit in the Fort George area. Now, of course, all the speculators in British Columbia, their ears perk up. Two of them jump in there.
Yeah.
The two Hammond brothers, William and George. They say, we're going to plot all this land around Fort George. So outside of the Hudson's Bay Company fort, they bring up 20,000 lots.
They do the surveying and create 20,000 lots out of this area.
Astonishing. This is going to be the mega metropolis of the interior British Columbia. Nobody believes them in British Columbia. They're not worried about British Columbia.
Fortunately, the world is larger than that, eh?
Much larger than British Columbia. It includes Britain, it includes the United States and France and Germany. They get a lot of money together. They say they will sell most of these lots, and surprisingly, they were right. They spend $500,000 on advertising, and this is from about 1900, and as the railway creeps closer and closer, about 1910 on, and they establish Fort George as what they think is going to be the terminus of the railway. Now, another guy just comes on the scene, and he's interesting. His name is Albert Johnson. He's an old hotelman. He's shrewd, too. He's also a land speculator. So he said, I think they haven't got the right spot. I've got the right spot just down the Fraser, because Fort George is up in the Chaco, about 2 miles from the Fraser. Hard for a stern-wheeler to get in there. He knows the stern-wheelers are going to have to serve this community before the railroad gets there, Mike. So he establishes a new town which he calls South Fort George. And in the middle is the Indian Reserve, and they control probably the best land.
Good time right now to look at the map, okay? So we've got the Fraser, which upstream sort of comes in from the east. It comes over the top and down.
Well, it comes in from the south,
And the Nechako is the other river.
Yeah, the Nechako is a marvelous river, but it doesn't have the room for stern-wheelers of any significant size. And there were stern-wheelers that went up the Nechako, you know, the Chilco and so on. But most of those stern-wheelers had a difficult time getting up the Nechako. So definitely South Fort George had the advantage in the early going.
So there we see on the map South Fort George, Prince George, which doesn't exist yet, but that's where it would come in, and and Fort George there. You've got 3 major canyons, 3 big trouble spots on the Fraser primarily.
You have indeed. And 2 of those trouble spots are between Old Quesnel and Soda Creek, actually, about 18 miles up from Quesnel. There's a canyon there called the Cottonwood Canyon. Barely enough room for a stern-wheeler to get through. In the narrowest part, around 50 feet. So you're coming pretty close to the walls. It takes a very, very good stern-wheeler captain. And the interesting thing about these captains, Mike, and I don't care whether you're talking about Captain Busey or Captain Brown or Captain Irving or the Gustave Blin Wright or any of those, they could read the water in a canyon by the surface indication of the water. Prospectors can do it to a degree. Stern-wheeler captains were masters at it.
Only the ones who survived, I mean, they had to know it.
Precisely.
So there's the Cottonwoods Canyon, getting back to our map to the south.
Miles, about 18 miles by river miles above Quesnel. And then you get up towards Fort George, and about 15 miles below that was the Fort George Canyon. Very, very tough canyon as well, with a big rock in the middle at one time. And then way above that, about 104 miles above Fort George, was the Grand Canyon of the Fraser. Big whirlpool, incredible, incredible obstacle. It's just virtually impassable, although people did get through it. Some did not. So these are the 3 obstacles. But there are other people on the scene. And one of these guys is a very interesting lawyer called Charles Vance Miller. And Charles Vance Miller won virtually all the prizes in Ontario when he went through law school. University of Ontario, if I remember correctly, and I think it was. And so Charles Vance Miller becomes interested after Laurier comes to power. And when Laurier came to power, there was a new member for that area, and that was Hewitt Bostock. Prior to that time, it had been the Bernards who supported the other government.
They have the whole express company. Is that the same Bernards?
So the Bernards had sold the express company to a guy called Steve Tingley. We alluded to Steve Tingley probably about 3 or 4 years ago on the program.
Well, he was the best teamster in the business.
Best whip.
Best whip.
Big difference between a teamster and a whip. A whip is a stagecoach driver. So he was the best whip. He was shrewd. He was honest. He was he was a marvelous individual. Really, I'm really quite impressed with Tingley. And anyway, so he realizes that he's out of favor now, and he decides to sell the British Columbia Express Company to Miller. And Miller gives him a fair offer, and he buys the express company. Now, Miller's a very, very intelligent human being. And he says, we're going to need stern-wheelers to go from Quesnel up to Fort George. So he builds a stern-wheeler in 1910. But before that, they tried to, I must tell you, they tried to test one of the canyons. And this was the Cottonwood Canyon. A guy named Brown, who eventually became the captain of the BX, which was the first stern-wheeler built by the British Columbia Express Company, and Captain John Irving, who was well known in British Columbia steamboating circles. They decided to test the canyon, which is the Cottonwood Canyon. The Cottonwood Canyon isn't very, and they weren't used to the river, so it isn't very wide. They decided to line up. That's using a capstan, which is a kind of
sort of winch yourself up.
That's right, winch yourself up the river.
And they had these just bolts or rings that hung
ring bolts right into the canyon wall. So they get about 3/4 of the way up the river, and there are a bunch of people on the boat, and they know they're all safe because they're winching up the river. One of the ring bolts gives way. Well, the bolt just goes like this, rip right around, and Brown, who was a marvelous, marvelous captain, was able to miss the wall just by a fraction.
So this stern-wheeler is coming through Cottonwood Canyon
sideways at first. They have to turn it around because the stern wheeler is almost 100 feet long. He was on the, I think he was on the Charlotte. Yeah, it was the Charlotte. And so he turns it around, misses the wall by about 1 foot. Then they came down the bottom, they looked at it again and said, I don't think we'll try it again today. So they didn't try it again today. And they built a new stern wheeler. And this was the famous BX.
Yeah.
Now the BX was about 127 feet long. It only drew about 20 inches of water. Carried 130 passengers. With 130 passengers and 100 tons on board, it only drew 30 inches of water. So it literally skimmed the surface of the Fraser. And the marvelous thing about Brown is that he was such a master, and this ship was said to be too wide, and it was pretty wide. It was about 30-odd feet wide. So they said it couldn't make it through the canyon. Well, it did make it through the canyon, and it was called the White Elephant at first.
But they didn't say, why? Did they just, because it was too
people
wide,
said,
they just
yeah, their competitors spread the news. It'll never get through the canyon. People would all perish on board and all the rest of it. Didn't pay attention to it at all. Eventually it became Queen of the North.
So a more appropriate
from the White Elephant of the Fraser to the Queen of the North.
All right.
And lots of stories about all these stern wheeler captains. The second major boat launched on the river was the British Columbia Express. The first one was the BX.
Yep.
The second one was the British Columbia Express. And the second one was really in charge of a captain who may or may not have any equal as far as color is concerned. He'd been on the Yukon, Captain Yukon River. He'd been on the Skeena River, and finally he comes down to the Fraser.
What's this guy? Who's this guy?
Captain Busey.
Busey.
B-U-C-E-Y. And if you read Willis J. West's story in 1949, British Columbia Historical Quarterly, and it's a marvelous story of the stern wheeler captains. And Willis J. West has long passed on, but he was a great historian. He's very readable. Yeah. He's very readable.
So this Busey's an ebullient character.
Yeah, he really is. He takes the law into his own hands on a number of occasions. And I'll tell you a couple of occasions, Mike, where he did take the law into his own hands. Now remember what is happening here. Okay. This is very, very important. The Hammonds launch a ship they call the Hammond. This is a stern wheeler to compete with the BX and the British Columbia Express.
These are the big promoters who've got 20,000 lots that they're selling all over the world.
And they're selling them. Yeah. And they are selling them.
They're worth bucks.
Sure they are. They spend $500,000 in advertising, but they take in well over $1 million the first round.
Okay, they've got a boat, the Hammond.
They've got a boat, and it's going to compete with the BX and the British Columbia Express, or the BC Express. Yeah. And of course the BX is in command of Brown, and the BC Express is in command of Busey. And Busey he starts going up and down the river. And remember, the captain is the law on board his ship. Marrying and burying and everything in between. Virtually, that's right, especially in those days, even in the inland waters. So he is going upriver. He's going from Quesnel, and there's a gambler on board. And the gambler is not a tin horn. Yeah. He's a straight gambler. Okay? Got a little financing behind him. Right, and he tells Captain Busey exactly what he's going to do, and we're going to start a little poker game, which they do, and everybody gets in on the act. There are laborers going in, and there are salesmen coming back and forth, and people going in and buy lots. So they start a little game. It gets out of hand a little bit. So too much money on the table. Well, a little bit too much. And there's $200 in the pot. And unknown to them is a new member of the British Columbia Provincial Police. This was totally out of character, this story, for the BC Provincial Police, because I have a lot of time for them. Good police force. But this guy was a little bit different. He looks at that pot. Maybe too green. Yeah, a little too green. Okay. When he sent an assignment into that area, he looks at that pot and says, this is against the law. And he seizes the pot. $200. That's big, big money. And he repairs to his cabin. Well, they go and tell the purser, and the purser tells Captain Busey, and Busey says, oh. So he goes back to the cabin of the British Columbia police officer, who is unnamed. He said, I think you should give that money back. The guy says, no. Then Busey sends word when he gets back, send half of it back. You can keep the rest. He bid at it. The policeman goes for it. Policeman sent $100 back, kept the rest. Now he'd accepted a bribe. Oh, danger. So Busey sends two of his deckhands out, sees the constable, bring him down in front of all the gamblers and all the people there, and dresses him down in some of the most colorful language ever heard on the Fraser River, before or since. He'd been 20 or 30 years a steamboat captain, and the expletives he used, some people had never heard before. And, it was really quite astonishing. They say people remembered it for years afterwards. What happened to this? And the guy grew from 6 feet right down, he shrunk down to about 1 foot. Yeah. And eventually he said he was going to throw him on irons, amongst other things, and eventually he just disgorged him at South Fort George, and he was sent back immediately in the next boat, not with Busey, by the way. And so this is what Busey was like. Yeah. And another time, Busey was running running the Grand Canyon. Now the Grand Canyon,
This is upstream from
about
Fort George?
about
Yeah.
104 miles upstream from Fort George.
Okay.
And it was so vicious. There was a huge whirlpool in the Grand Canyon. So if they sent down barges loaded with supplies, they figured on losing 10 to 15% of the barges. And that meant 10 to 15% of the lives. And downriver, all through these years, they'd pick up bodies in various eddies of the Fraser River, all the way downriver from the Grand Canyon. And so he decided to tackle the Grand Canyon once and got up there and got caught in the whirlpool. Busey would tackle anything, you know. And he got caught in the whirlpool, and the stern wheeler goes round and round and round, and there was a guy on board, a businessman, who was absolutely white, just white with fear. And stern wheeler got so close to the side, it scraped the side of the canyon. He saw a ledge and jumped off. And managed to hang on to the ledge. And eventually, of course, Busey got the stern wheeler out of the stern wheeler, goes downriver a little bit, hangs up on the shore and says, how are we going to get this guy out? Because the ledge is way down towards the river. There's sheer cliff above him. So he sent 2 deckhands out with a line of rope, and they sent the rope down. The guy wouldn't take the rope. He didn't want to do it. So they had to send one of the smaller deckhands down, tie him onto the rope, and bring them both back up, which they did. And really quite astonishing. The guy was still there, because it took about an hour and a half to get to him.
Yeah.
And they had to put him back on ship and give him a good stiff shot of brandy. And Busey, amongst other things, he considered himself the law. Another time they're running from the Grand Canyon. They're coming down just below the Grand Canyon, and this is very, very swift water. And the Fraser's a very treacherous river in spots, Mike. And so they're coming down from the Grand Canyon, and they see a white flag on shore.
That's a sign they're supposed to pull on for passengers or something.
He pulls right in. He pulls right in, and there are 20 laborers, construction workers sitting there. So they jump on the boat, and the purser goes up and says to the first guy, big guy, says, your fare is such and such, so many dollars. He says, I'm not going to pay. Well, the purser realizes he has a real problem. This guy doesn't pay. None of them are going to pay. And he looks around, they're all grinning. They're not going to pay. He sends word to Busey, and Busey comes down and says, you got to pay your fare. The guy says, I'm not going to pay. Busey says, deckhands. 2 deckhands come up, they grab this guy by the shoulders, throw him overboard. Over he goes, into the river, running fast. The river's running fast. Busey doesn't even pay any attention to him. He pulls the stern wheeler out sternwise, and he pulls down the river. And believe it or not, the stern wheeler was going down river. This guy got a fast part of the current. He passes the stern wheeler swimming to save his life. Swimming to save his life. He actually passed the stern wheeler going down the river, and of course his companions are just absolutely awestruck at this display. They ponied up all their fare without another word, and no more problem with Busey or with the fare or anything else.
Well, I mean, what happens to South Fort George and Prince George and all these kind of things?
What happens is now that Charles Vance Miller decides to get in the act. He sends an emissary in to buy the reservation from the Indians. He pays them $100,000 cash, which was a lot then. The railroad company, the Grand Trunk Pacific, finds out about it. They don't like it. They go to see Miller and they try to negotiate, and they decide to. They offer the Indians $125,000, but Miller gets just over 1,000 lots given to him from the railway company. Right. Some of those lots he sold for $3,500 each. He probably made several $100,000 without doing a tap of work. So what happens is Fort George starts to decline, and South Fort George, which was a rip-roaring town, it had everything. I mean, you know, it had the hotels. The sternwheeler were landing there, so it was a sternwheeler landing. It had the red light district. It had gambling joints running 24 hours a day. It declines, and we see by 1914, 1915, the decline of both those towns, and a new town arises, and that, of course, was called Prince George.
And when this shot of Prince George shows a flat field and 3 buildings or something on it, it wasn't long before it was the bustling metropolis because the railroad was coming.
That's right. And not only that, the railroad was coming. It's on the outskirts of the town, of course. But you see about the same time, you see this shot of South Fort George. And it looks like it's bustling. But this is a dying town. So that South Fort George and Fort George were eventually incorporated into the great metropolis of the interior, which is Prince George.
Now, were those 3 town sites, are they all now within the boundaries of the existing city of Prince George?
Oh, definitely.
So in this little tiny area, all of this competition just roaring.
Cauldron of competition.
Cauldron of competition. I'm going to take a break here, be back in just a second, because you can't run sternwheelers on the Fraser without losing a few, and we're going to tell that story right after these words. There are treasures and there are treasures. I'm holding a BX Express piece of china here, but gosh, Bill, I can't see past the gold, which is also in here. This has to do with a couple of treasure stories.
Okay. Well, essentially it does. The British Columbia Express sternwheeler, this came off the sternwheeler.
Yep.
These type of plates were on the sternwheeler.
They did up it as well as the CPR. They were as proud as the CPR.
Indeed, a marvelous company, the British Columbia Express. And the thing is, why the gold coins and why the silver coins are there, Mike, because there are an undefined number of treasures in the river between Quesnel and between the Grand Canyon. Now, when they ran the Grand Canyon, scores and scores of people lost their lives. Many of them were carrying gold coins or silver coins. Yeah. The same thing happened. Go ahead.
You said that they lost 10 to 15% of the barges they sent. Now, they just floated them down, hoping that the barge would get through.
Barges broke up. All the equipment was lost on the barges when they broke up.
Some guys tried to hitch rides, and they were lost.
Well, certainly they would be handling the barge. You know, they would be taking their chance. That's what they got paid for. And so they would go down with everything that they had, all the portable cash, their guns, their coins, and all the rest of it. So certainly in the Grand Canyon, now I wouldn't advise anyone to go in there and look for it, but there certainly are gold coins and silver coins there, as well as other pieces of equipment and sidearms. Certainly there is in the Prince George Canyon as well, Mike, which is a significant canyon. The Indians consider the Prince George Canyon,
the Fort George Canyon,
or the Fort George Canyon, I should say, probably the most dangerous of the canyons, outside of the Grand Canyon, which is probably the most dangerous.
I mean, they didn't even consider it. It was so bad, the water was so bad, you just didn't even think about it.
The Indians would never have run that. They did run the Fort George Canyon, and they did run the Cottonwood Canyon. The Cottonwood Canyon was a little bit more sedate in some respects, but the Fraser River itself ran 14 miles an hour in some of those areas. So you're taking a sternwheeler up, and something happens, if one of the lines breaks, or the ringboat pulls, or something happens, or you hit a log, hit a deadhead, you hit a rock, you're in deep, deep trouble. And they lost only about 3 or 4 boats on that stretch of river, which was very fortunate. One of them, unfortunately, was the British Columbia Express.
It failed eventually.
And here it is, in 1919, after practically a decade on the river, Mike, and there it is, slowly listing, and eventually it was carrying cement, and it was simply overloaded. And it starts to tilt, and of course the British Columbia Express, which I think was the finest of the sternwheelers on that central part of the Fraser River, finally goes to its doom in the water.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the sternwheelers were put out of business pretty quick by the railroad because they put in a bridge, didn't they, that precluded the possibility of
They put a line across. Busey was going to shoot all the guards on this line. He decided not to. They prevailed upon him not to shoot the guards. They took it to the Supreme Court. They won. They lost at the Supreme Court. Then they took it to the Privy Council in London and lost there. Essentially, the railroad prevented the sternwheelers, the British Columbia Express, from plying it straight upriver.
And they won in court.
They did indeed.
That's all the time we have for Gold Trails today. Back again next time with more adventures. See you then.